Before we begin, this is Ophelia's After Dark, where love isn't safe. Tonight's story starts with a choice and ends with a price. If you're new here, subscribe and turn on notifications. Stories like this don't come around often, and you don't want to miss what happens next. Now let's begin. The car turned through iron gates and Briana pressed her face closer to the window. She had imagined it. Of course she had. Her mother had described it carefully over the phone, the address in the hills, the garden that took a full-time staff to maintain. But imagination had not prepared her for this. The Hahn mansion rose at the end of a stone driveway like something from a magazine spread. Glass and steel and pale stone, every line deliberate, every angle chosen. There were flowers Briana didn't know the names of lining the path to the front door, and the evening light caught the windows and turned them to gold. Her mother reached over and squeezed her hand from the passenger seat. "It's going to be wonderful," she said softly. "You'll see." Briana smiled because her mother needed her to. Inside, she felt like a girl wearing someone else's clothes, too fine, too fitted, belonging to a life she hadn't yet earned. She was 20 years old. She had grown up in a two-bedroom apartment in Atlanta where the radiator knocked in winter and the upstairs neighbor played music until 2 in the morning. She knew how to stretch a grocery run to 2 weeks. She did not know how to live in a place like this, but her mother was happy. Genuinely, luminously happy in a way Briana had not seen from her in years. Not since her father left when Briana was 9, and her mother quietly rebuilt their lives with the particular grace of a woman who refused to let anything break her completely. When she met Mr. Hahn at a conference 2 years ago, something had shifted in her. Slowly at first, then all at once. She deserved this. Briana knew that. She was still reasoning herself into calm when the car stopped. Mr. Hahn met them at the door, warm, gracious, genuinely kind in the way of a man who has nothing left to prove. He took their bags before the staff could and ushered them into a foyer that was larger than their old apartment. All pale stone floors and a staircase that curved upward like a sentence with a beautiful ending. And then Briana looked up. At the top of the staircase, one hand resting lightly on the railing, stood a young man watching her with dark, unreadable eyes. He was tall and still, dressed simply in dark clothes, and he looked at her with the particular attention of someone who had not expected to see something that required this much looking. Her breath caught. He didn't smile. He didn't look away. Neither did she. For 3 full seconds the world balanced on that staircase between them, and then Mr. Hahn was saying something about the house, about rooms, about dinner, and the moment broke and Briana looked away and told herself it was nothing. She was already certain it wasn't nothing. Mr. Hahn gestured toward his son with a proud, easy smile that belonged to a man showing off something he had made well. "Briana, this is Jin, my son." He placed a hand briefly on Jin's shoulder. "You are both the same age. I hope you will be good company for each other." Jin descended the last 2 steps and extended his hand. "Welcome," he said simply. His voice was low and even. His face gave nothing away. But when his hand closed around hers, just for a moment, just a handshake, his eyes moved over her face with a quiet attention that felt like considerably more than courtesy. Briana had dressed simply for the move. A fitted cream top, dark jeans, her long curls loose around her shoulders the way she always wore them when she wasn't trying. She had not been trying to impress anyone. She had been in a car for 3 hours. But something shifted in Jin's expression in the space of a single second, something that traveled from her face to her curls to the soft curve of her figure and back up to her eyes before being pulled back almost immediately. The way you snatch your hand from a flame before anyone sees you've been burned. He turned toward the staircase. "I'll show you your room." She followed him up. The hallway on the 2nd floor was long and quiet, the carpet thick enough to swallow footsteps entirely. Halfway down, Jin paused to reach past her and open a door, and for one suspended moment he was close. Close enough that she could feel the warmth off his arm, could sense the particular stillness he carried, could see the line of his jaw from inches away. His eyes dropped just briefly, just once, to the soft neckline of her top, to the way her curls fell against her shoulder, to the full curve of her hip in the narrow hallway. He looked away immediately, but she saw it. He pushed the door open and stepped back, his face composed and unreadable again. "Your room," he said quietly. Briana stepped inside and her lips parted. The room was enormous, a king-sized bed dressed in ivory linen against a wall of windows that looked out over the garden. A walk-in closet stood open, already stocked with designer labels, shoes still in their boxes, handbags she had only ever seen in magazines. She turned slowly, taking it all in with the careful wonder of someone trying not to look overwhelmed. When she turned back, Jin was leaning against the doorframe watching her, arms loosely folded, that same careful expression. But his eyes were moving over her the way a person reads something they are trying to memorize before it disappears. She tilted her head. "Thank you," she said softly, "for showing me." He nodded once. Then, almost like it cost him something, he said, "If you need anything, my room is at the end of the hall." He held her gaze one beat longer than necessary. Then he was gone. Briana stood alone in the center of her beautiful new room and pressed her fingers to her collarbone where her pulse was doing something it had no business doing. She had been in this house less than an hour. She was already in trouble. The breakfast table was set like something from a hotel, fresh fruit arranged in a bowl, chopsticks beside Western silverware, a housekeeper moving quietly in the background refilling coffee without being asked. Briana came downstairs in a simple silk robe over her pajamas, her long curls pinned loosely at the back of her neck with a few escaping around her face. She hadn't expected the full family production. She had expected cereal alone in a quiet kitchen. Jin was already there. Dark slacks, a simple black shirt, hair slightly damp from a shower. He looked up when she walked in and something moved briefly across his face, a flicker, quickly filed away before he returned his attention to his coffee. "Mr." Han was warm and talkative over breakfast, asking Briana about her college plans, her interests, what she had left behind in Atlanta. Her mother smiled and added things. The conversation moved easily through all the comfortable territory of people becoming a family. Briana answered all of it. She was good at this, at being present, at making people feel heard. She had been doing it her whole life. 20 minutes in, Jin's knee pressed against hers beneath the table. Not an accident. There was too much room under that table for it to be an accident. It was the lightest possible pressure, barely there, almost a question, but deliberate in the way that only deliberate stillness can be. He didn't move it. He didn't look at her. He continued his conversation with his father about something she could no longer track because every nerve ending she possessed had migrated to the 4 inches of contact between his knee and hers. She didn't move either. She reached for her glass, set it down, laughed at something her mother said. Her face gave nothing away. Under the table, his knee stayed exactly where it was, warm and steady against hers, for the entire rest of the meal. When Mr. Han excused himself and her mother followed, the table went quiet, just the two of them and the soft sounds of the kitchen settling. Jin lifted his coffee cup, took a slow sip, set it down. He did not look at her, but the corner of his mouth moved, just slightly, just enough. Briana looked down at her plate to hide her smile. So that's how this is going to go, she thought. The door closed behind their parents and the mansion went quiet in a way that felt almost loud. Briana stood in the foyer listening to the sound of the car disappearing down the driveway. She counted to 5. Then she turned around. Jin was leaning against the archway to the living room, hands in his pockets, watching her the way he had been watching her since the moment she arrived, like she was something he was trying to solve. "They'll be gone until 11, he said. "I know." She crossed her arms loosely. "Your father mentioned." Silence, not uncomfortable. That was the thing about the silence between them, it never felt empty. It felt full, overfull. Like a room with too much furniture, every inch occupied by something neither of them was saying. Jin pushed off the wall. "Are you hungry?" She blinked a little. "Come on." He led her to the back kitchen, not the formal dining side but the real one, where the counters were worn at the edges and there was a radio on the windowsill and things were arranged the way they are when someone actually cooks in a space rather than performing cooking. He moved through it with easy familiarity, pulling open the refrigerator, setting things on the counter without ceremony. "You cook?" she asked, surprised. "My mother taught me." A beat. He didn't look up. Before she passed. Briana went still. "Jin, I'm sorry." He glanced at her then, brief and honest, without the careful composure he wore in every other context. It was a long time ago. He set a pan on the stove. "Sit." She sat on the counter beside the stove the way she used to sit in her mother's kitchen back home in Atlanta, and something about that, the familiarity of it, the ease of it, made her exhale for the first time since she arrived in this house. He cooked. She talked, slowly at first, then more freely. She told him about her old neighborhood, her best friend back home, the music she loved, the business degree she was working toward, and why. He listened the way very few people actually listen, fully, without waiting for his own turn to speak. Occasionally he asked a question that told her he had been paying close attention to everything. At some point he handed her a bowl across the counter, and their fingers overlapped on the ceramic and neither of them moved for a moment too long to be accidental. His eyes came up to hers. The kitchen was warm. The radio was playing something low. Outside, the garden lights had come on against the dark. "Jin," she said quietly. She wasn't sure what she meant to say after that. He set the bowl down slowly. He turned to face her fully, leaning one hand on the counter beside her hip, close enough now that she could see the detail in his dark eyes, the careful, controlled wanting in them that he had been carrying since the moment she walked through his front door. "I know," he said softly. Like he already knew everything she hadn't said. Her heart was going at a pace she could no longer justify. "This is complicated," she whispered. "Yes." He didn't move back. "Does that change anything for you?" She looked at him for a long moment, his face open and waiting in a way she hadn't seen from him before, all the composure stripped back to something honest underneath. She reached up and straightened the collar of his shirt, slowly, deliberately. "Ask me again in a week," she said softly, his breath released. He smiled, a real one, the first she had seen, and it rearranged his whole face into something that made her chest ache quietly. He stepped back and handed her the bowl. "Eat," he said, "before it gets cold." She laughed and he laughed too, quiet and low, and just like that the tension didn't disappear, it settled into something warmer, something that felt dangerously like the beginning of something real. The week that followed passed like a held breath. It started small, the way things that matter always do. Tuesday morning, Jin set a coffee on the desk beside her without being asked, exactly the way she had made it the night their parents went out, 2 sugars, a splash of cream, and walked away without a word. She stared at the cup for a full minute before she could bring herself to drink from it. Wednesday, they studied at opposite ends of the library table for 3 hours. At some point, her highlighter rolled off the edge and they both reached for it at the same moment, and his hand closed over hers on the floor and they stayed like that, crouched beneath the table, eyes level, neither one willing to be the first to let go. He let go first, but slowly. Thursday night they sat on the rooftop until past midnight talking about everything and nothing. His mother, her father who left when she was 9, what they both wanted from their lives beyond what their parents had mapped out for them. The city stretched below them glittering and indifferent, and up there in the dark it felt like they existed outside of all the complications. Just 2 people, just this. She fell asleep in the rooftop chair somewhere around 1 in the morning, and woke to find a blanket over her shoulders and Jin still sitting beside her reading, the lamp on the small table making a warm circle of light, as though leaving without her had simply not occurred to him. Friday, he sat beside her on the library couch, instead of across from her, and their shoulders touched the entire 2 hours, and he turned pages, and she stared at the same paragraph 17 times. By Saturday, the atmosphere in the house had changed in a way that was almost visible. Her mother gave her a look over dinner that Briana deflected with a long drink of water. Mr. Han noticed nothing. Jin ate calmly and passed her the salt before she reached for it. Saturday night she was in the library alone. Late. house asleep. She heard him before she saw him, quiet footsteps, the soft push of the door. Jin stood in the doorway in a gray t-shirt and sweats, hair loose, the careful composure he wore during the day fully absent. He looked younger, unguarded. He looked like himself. He crossed the room and sat beside her, not at the other end, beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his arm against hers. She set her book down. He leaned his head back against the couch and looked at the ceiling. "I've been thinking," he said quietly. "About what?" He turned his head to look at her. This close she could see everything his careful face usually hid, the wanting in it, the restraint that had been costing him all week, the way his eyes moved over her slowly like he was giving himself permission for the first time. "You said to ask you again in a week," he said. "Jin." "It's been a week, Briana." The way he said her name, low and deliberate like he had been saving it, she looked at him. At the line of his jaw in the low lamplight, the careful rise and fall of his chest, the dark eyes that had been finding hers across every room in this house for 7 days straight. "I know," she whispered. He reached up slowly and tucked one long curl behind her ear, his fingers trailing the edge of her jaw with a gentleness that felt like something that had been thought about for days. She felt it everywhere. Then he leaned in. The kiss was soft at first, questioning, his mouth barely on hers, giving her every chance to pull back. She didn't pull back. She turned toward him and he made a quiet sound low in his throat and kissed her properly, deep and slow and full of everything that week had been building toward. His hand cradled her jaw like she was something he had been afraid to touch and was finally allowing himself. She kissed him back with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, the library was very quiet. His forehead came to rest against hers. His eyes were still closed. Her fingers were wound into the front of his t-shirt without her remembering putting them there. "I've wanted to do that," he said softly, "since the moment you walked through that door." She laughed quietly, unsteady, undone. "You didn't show it." He pulled back just enough to look at her, his eyes warm in a way she had never seen from him before, open, completely open. "I was terrified of you," he said simply. She looked at this beautiful, composed, quietly devastating man and felt something lock into place inside her chest like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known was there. She kissed him again, slower this time, like they had all the time in the world. Maybe they did. The 2 weeks that followed were the sweetest kind of torture. To the outside world nothing had changed. Jin still passed the salt at dinner. Briana still smiled politely at Mr. Han's stories. They sat at opposite ends of the library table and kept their faces arranged into the careful neutrality of two young people who were simply getting along well. But beneath all of it, beneath every mundane, ordinary moment, something was alive and electric and entirely theirs. A hand at the small of her back as he stepped past her in the kitchen, gone before anyone could register it. His fingers finding hers under the dinner table and staying there through the entire meal while both their faces remained perfectly composed. Stolen minutes in the hallway between their rooms, his hand in her curls, her fingers at his jaw, kisses broken off the moment a floorboard creaked anywhere in the house. The secrecy did something to it, made it more. Every look across a room carried the weight of everything they weren't saying out loud. Every accidental touch in public was a full conversation. Briana had never wanted anything the way she wanted those stolen minutes. Then their parents announced a long weekend away, business and pleasure, Mr. Han's words, accompanied by her mother's barely contained delight. Back Monday. Friday and Saturday passed in a giddy, careful sweetness, cooking together, music on the rooftop, kisses that had nowhere to be rushed to and so weren't. Sunday evening Briana got ready for bed early, her body tired but her mind restless and warm. She lay in the dark for an hour thinking about the way he looked at her when their parents weren't watching, the way he said her name, the way he had kissed her that first night in the library like she was something he had been saving himself for. She got up. She padded down the hallway in her silk gown, bare feet silent on the thick carpet. A thin line of light showed under Jin's door. She knocked softly. No answer. She pushed the door open slowly. He must have fallen asleep with the lamp on and stepped inside. He wasn't asleep. He was in the chair by the window, head tilted back, eyes closed, his breathing low and unsteady. On the small table beside him, his phone screen glowed with a photograph. Her, on the rooftop last week, her curls loose, her robe slightly open at the shoulder, laughing at something he had said, the golden lamp light catching the warm curves of her in a way she hadn't known he'd captured. Briana went completely still. She knew she should leave. Every reasonable part of her knew that, but her feet didn't move. Her eyes didn't move. She stood at the side of his chair and watched him, the long line of his throat, the tension in his jaw, the slight part of his lips, and something low and deep inside her responded to all of it in a way she had no language for. He hadn't heard her. He was too far gone. She should leave. She didn't leave. "Continue," she said softly. The word dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. Jin's eyes flew open. The shock on his face was complete and unguarded. She had never seen him so fully stripped of composure, and for one long, terrible second he couldn't speak. She held his gaze. She didn't look away. She didn't apologize. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat, but she stood there in the lamplight in her silk gown with her curls loose around her shoulders, and she let him see that she meant exactly what she had said. His chest rose and fell. "Briana." "I said continue." Something broke open behind his eyes. She crossed the small distance between them and settled onto his lap, her knees on either side of him, her hands resting lightly on his chest. This close she could feel the heat radiating off him, could feel his heart pounding just as hard as hers. His hands found her waist, uncertain for one moment, just one, and then certain. Completely certain. He looked up at her in the low gold light and she watched him take her in, the curls falling around her face, the full soft curves of her in the thin gown, the warm brown of her skin in the lamplight, and the wanting on his face was so open and undefended that it made her own breath leave her. "You have no idea," he said quietly, "what you do to me." "Show me," she whispered. He kissed her, deep and desperate and full of every carefully restrained moment compressed into one, and his hands moved over her curves with a reverence that made her feel like something precious. Her fingers wound into his hair. The night stretched out around them, warm and private and entirely theirs. The mansion was quiet. There was no one to hide from. For the first time since she arrived, there was nothing between them at all. The morning came soft and golden, and Briana lay on her back in her own bed, staring at the ceiling with her hands folded on her stomach like a woman taking inventory of herself. Nothing had happened, not the way that changes everything on the outside. She was in her own room, her own bed, but something had shifted so fundamentally in the night that she could feel it in her chest, like a new room had been opened inside her that hadn't existed yesterday. She was still taking stock of it when a soft knock came at her door. "Come in." Jin opened the door slowly, already dressed. Dark jeans, simple white shirt, hair neat. He was holding 2 coffees. He looked at her across the room, and for a moment neither of them spoke, and his face told her everything she needed to know. He wasn't going to pretend. He wasn't going to pull the careful mask back down. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of her bed and handed her the coffee, 2 sugars, splash of cream, exactly right, and she sat up against the headboard and wrapped both hands around the mug, and they sat together in the quiet morning like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes." A sideways glance. "Are you?" The corner of his mouth moved. "Better than okay." She laughed softly into her coffee. He reached over and tucked a curl behind her ear the way he always did now, gently, completely, and let his hand linger at her jaw. "Last night wasn't nothing to me," he said. "It wasn't nothing to me either." He nodded once, like that settled something. 3 weeks later, it was Jin's 21st birthday. He hadn't wanted a big thing, but his friends had other ideas, and by the time the evening arrived it had become a night out, a sleek club in the city, a private section with bottle service, music that moved through the floor, a group that kept growing. Briana got ready with her girls in her room. She wore a black dress that did everything it was supposed to do, fitted through the waist, short enough, the neckline sitting exactly right against the warm brown of her skin, her long curls pinned up with a few loose pieces falling at her neck. When she came downstairs, Jin was waiting in the foyer in a dark suit jacket, talking to one of his friends. He looked up when he heard her heels on the stairs. His friend said something. Jin didn't hear it. His eyes moved over her from the bottom of the staircase to her face, and he went completely, absolutely still for 2 full seconds before he caught himself. She smiled at him with complete innocence. He cleared his throat and looked away, and she filed that away with everything else she was quietly collecting about him. The night was loud and warm and full of good things. By midnight, the private section felt like its own small world. Briana had lost count of her drinks somewhere around the 3rd hour. Not sloppy, just warm all the way through, the edges softened, the laugh that lived in her chest coming easily. She danced with her girls and felt beautiful and free, and when she looked across the room, Jin was watching her from his seat with the particular focused stillness of a man who had given up pretending he wasn't. She crossed the room and sat beside him and leaned into his shoulder, and he put his arm around her without hesitation and bent his head close to speak in her ear over the music. "How much have you had?" "Enough," she said, "to tell you that you look really good tonight." She felt him smile against her hair. "You've been trying to kill me since you walked down those stairs," he said. She pulled back just enough to look at him. His face was close, his eyes dark and warm and full of something that had been building since that first morning she arrived. "Happy birthday," she whispered. He looked at her for a long moment, then he stood and held out his hand. "Come on." She took it. The hotel room was quiet and high above the city, floor-to-ceiling windows. Seoul spread out below them like a field of light, the Han River a dark ribbon cutting through it all. Briana stood at the window looking out and felt Jin come to stand behind her, close, not touching, just present in the way he always was. She could see their reflection in the glass, him tall and still behind her, her curls loose now, the city glowing around them. She turned. He kissed her. Slow at first, like every first kiss they had ever had, careful, giving her every chance to decide. She decided immediately. She kissed him back and felt him exhale against her mouth like he had been holding that breath for months. He pulled back and rested his forehead against hers. In the low light, his eyes moved over her face slowly and completely, as if memorizing every detail of this exact moment so he could find it again later. "Can I have you tonight?" His voice was quiet, but the emotion underneath it was unmistakable, not just wanting, something deeper, something that had been growing since the very first morning she walked through his father's door and looked up and found him at the top of the stairs looking back. Briana lifted her hand to his cheek. She had imagined this moment, carefully, with distance, in the small hours of the night when you can be honest with yourself. She had set it aside again and again because the timing was never right and the situation was never simple. She was done being sensible. "I've been yours for a long time," she whispered. Something moved across his face, relief and tenderness, and a wanting so open it made her chest ache. He kissed her again, differently this time. With a tenderness that carried everything, every stolen kiss in the hallway, every hand found under the dinner table, every night on the rooftop, every careful look across every room in that house. The city lights stretched below them, infinite and indifferent. He reached up slowly and found the pins in her hair one by one until her curls fell loose around her shoulders. He ran his hands through them gently, watching them fall, his expression so unhurried and reverent that she felt tears behind her eyes she refused to let fall. "So beautiful," he murmured, not performing it, stating a fact that overwhelmed him. His hands moved over her slowly, her shoulders, the curve of her waist, the flare of her hips, as though learning something he intended to know for the rest of his life. She reached for him in return, unsteady at first, then certain. He guided her closer, his eyes never leaving her face, and kissed her deeper, until there was no careful distance left between them at all. When he moved over her, the city glowing through the window behind him, it wasn't rushed. It was intentional, the way only something long decided can be intentional. She pulled him closer and he held her like she was something he had been afraid of losing before he ever had her. It was tender and new and entirely theirs. Afterward, the room was soft and still. Briana lay with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. His hand moved through her curls in long, unhurried strokes. "Hey," he said quietly into the dark. "Hey." A pause, his hand still moving. "I love you," simple, certain, like he had known it for a long time and was only now finding it safe enough to say out loud. Briana closed her eyes. She pressed her hand flat against his chest, against the steady beat of his heart, and felt the truth of it move through her like something coming home. "I love you too," she said. "I think I have for a while." He pressed his lips to the top of her head and held her closer, and outside the city went on glittering, and neither of them slept for a long time because sleeping meant the night would end, and neither of them was ready for that yet. The apartment was small by Han standards and perfect by every other measure. Third floor. A window in the kitchen that caught the morning light just right. A bookshelf Jin built badly on a Saturday afternoon while Briana sat on the counter reading instructions he ignored, both of them laughing until her sides hurt. Two desks pushed together in the living room because neither of them could study properly in separate rooms anymore. It was theirs. Completely and quietly and beautifully theirs. They moved through that life like people who had found something rare and knew it carefully, gratefully, without making too much noise in case the world noticed, and decided to take it back. Classes during the day. Evenings cooking or studying or walking the Han River with her hand in the pocket of his jacket. Weekends that belonged to nobody but them. They were happy in the specific way of two people who have chosen each other privately and don't need anyone else to know it yet. Their parents visited at Christmas. The apartment became a family apartment for the week. Mr. Han and her mother in the guest room. Jin and Briana reassembled into their public selves with the practiced ease of 2 years' experience. Separate sides of the couch. Careful distances at the dinner table. Nothing that would cause a question neither of them was ready to answer. It worked. It always worked. Until the last dinner. Mr. Han set down his chopsticks with the particular deliberateness of a man about to say something that is not a suggestion. "Jin, there is something we need to discuss as a family." Jin looked up. Briana was reaching for her water glass and she went still without knowing why, some animal instinct, something in Mr. Han's tone that her body registered before her mind caught up. "The arrangement with the Yi family has been decided. You will be engaged to Ming Yi before the end of the year." The table went absolutely silent. Briana set her glass down. She did not look at Jin. She looked at her plate and picked up her chopsticks and moved a piece of food from one side to the other, and she breathed carefully, evenly, while the bottom dropped out of her stomach. Across the table she felt Jin go rigid. She did not look at him. She couldn't. If she looked at him, she would not be able to keep her face arranged into the expression of mild, polite interest she was currently wearing like armor. Jin argued. His voice stayed controlled for approximately 45 seconds before the control cracked. This was not the old times. He was not a commodity. He would not marry someone he did not love. His voice carried the particular heat of a man who has something specific and real to lose and cannot say so out loud. Mr. Han was a stone wall. This was obligation. This was a business arrangement decades in the making between two families. This was simply what was going to happen. Her mother said nothing. She was watching Briana. Briana did not look up from her plate. They argued privately after dinner in low, urgent voices in the kitchen while their parents sat in the living room 20 feet away. Jin was certain. He would refuse. He would find a way out. He would tell his father the truth if he had to, all of it, everything, because there was no version of his life that didn't have her in it, and he needed her to know that. Briana listened to all of it. She looked at his face, open and desperate and more unguarded than she had ever seen him, and she loved him so much in that moment that it felt like a physical pain. And she made a decision she didn't tell him about. She could not be the reason he lost his family, his father's respect, his inheritance, his name. She had watched her own mother rebuild from nothing, and she knew exactly what it cost, and she would not be the thing that made Jin Han pay that price. She loved him too much to let him do it. It happened gradually and then all at once. She stopped reaching for his hand under the table. She started sleeping in her own bed, the first time since they moved to Seoul that the space between their rooms felt like actual space. She was kind and normal and completely unreachable, and she watched the confusion on his face harden slowly into something worse than confusion. She called Mr. Han from the university library on a Tuesday afternoon. She wanted to finish her senior year in New York, she told him. The entertainment industry connections there would give her advantages she couldn't get anywhere else. She needed his help with the logistics. A pause on the line. "I'll arrange it," Mr. Han said. "One more thing, please don't tell Jin before I go. I don't want to disrupt his studies during finals." Another pause, longer. "All right, Briana." She hung up and sat in the library for 20 minutes staring at nothing before she could make her legs work well enough to stand. She left on a Friday. Classes had ended for the year. Jin was in a seminar that ran until 4. She packed 2 bags and stood in the doorway of their apartment looking at the badly built bookshelf and the 2 desks pushed together and the coffee mug on his side that still had his lip print on it from that morning. She had written 7 notes. She deleted them all. She picked up her bags and she left. He came home at 4:15. He did not call. She had half expected him to call. He did not call because Jin Han, when he was hurt badly enough, went somewhere interior and silent and unreachable and turned the pain into fuel. She knew that about him. She had always known that about him. She did the same thing. She landed in New York on a Saturday. By Monday, she had found a sublet in Harlem and enrolled in the transfer program and begun the work of becoming someone who did not think about a badly built bookshelf every time she closed her eyes. She was not entirely successful, but she was determined. New York took her seriously and she took it back. Senior year dissolved into the internship she'd angled for, a high-profile entertainment firm in Midtown where she worked harder than anyone and noticed everything, and made herself indispensable with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been training their whole life to hold it together under pressure. She was good at the work. She was genuinely, surprisingly good at it. That helped. She thought about him less as the months went on. That was what she told herself. She thought about him constantly. That was the truth. She thought about the bookshelf, the coffee, the rooftop, the way he said her name. She carried all of it in the sealed room she had made inside herself for exactly this purpose, airtight, soundproof, visited only in the small hours when her defenses were down. She accepted the full-time offer after graduation. She found a real apartment in Brooklyn with a window she loved. She built a life that was hers, fully and only hers, in a city that asked no questions about where you came from or what you had loved and left behind. Jin, she knew from the small things her mother let slip without meaning to, had taken over his father's company. Han Technologies was growing. He was good at it the way he was good at everything, quietly, completely, with his whole attention. She was glad for him. She told herself that and mostly believed it. 2 years and 3 months after she left Seoul, she came home from work on a Tuesday evening in October. She went through the mail standing in the kitchen. Bill, magazine, a thick cream envelope with her name written in a calligrapher's hand and a Florida postmark. She knew what it was before she opened it. Some part of her had been expecting it for 2 years. She opened it anyway. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the engagement of Jin Han and Ming Yi." She read it twice. Then she set it down on the counter and pressed both palms flat on the cool surface and looked at it. She had expected this. Had known it was coming the way you know a season is changing, had prepared herself for it in the abstract. She was fine. She had built a whole life. She was completely fine. The tears that hit the counter were a surprise to no one except her. She stood there for a few minutes. Then she wiped her face, poured herself a glass of wine, and sat on the couch and looked at the invitation from across the room. She would not go. Obviously, she would not go. She went. She told herself it was for her mother. Her mother was family now, genuinely, warmly family, and not attending would require an explanation Briana didn't have the energy to construct. She would go. She would be gracious and composed, and she would smile at the right moments and leave early. That would be that. She flew down on a Friday. The party was Saturday evening. Saturday afternoon, she stood in the guest room of the family's Florida house in a deep burgundy dress, her curls loose around her shoulders, and rehearsed her face in the mirror until it looked like the face of someone attending a party. Her mother and Mr. Han had gone to the hotel to receive arriving family. The house was dark and quiet when she let herself in. She just needed an hour, alone in her old room before the evening began. Time to sit with the reality of what she was about to walk into. She moved through the quiet house and up the stairs toward the back corner room, the one that had been hers 3 years ago with its enormous bed and the walk-in closet full of things she had never quite felt she deserved. She pushed the door open. Across the hallway, through a door standing slightly open, a light was on. She went still. She had assumed the house was empty. She stepped into her room and closed the door and leaned against it and pressed her hand to her sternum where her heart was doing something complicated and fast. He was here. Jin was here. She sat on the edge of the bed and told herself to breathe. She was a professional. She had survived 2 years in New York alone and built something real from nothing, and she could survive one evening in the same vicinity as Jin Han without falling apart. She was still telling herself this when the door burst open. He filled the doorframe. Dark suit. White shirt open at the collar. His face stripped of every layer of composure she had ever watched him construct, raw and direct and electric with 2 years of something she recognized, because she had been carrying the same thing in her own chest like a stone. He crossed the room in 3 strides. His hand found her chin. He tilted her face up. He kissed her. Not gently, not carefully, not with the measured deliberateness of a man thinking about the right thing to do. He kissed her the way you reach for something when you have been afraid it was gone, with both hands, with your whole body, with everything you have been refusing to feel for 2 years compressed into a single moment that has nowhere left to go but out. Briana made a sound against his mouth that was equal parts shock and recognition, and she kissed him back before she had decided to, because her body remembered him in a way her mind had been trying to forget. Everything she had buried came up at once. His jacket hit the floor. Her hands were at his shirt. His were at her back, her waist, her hips, relearning all of it with an urgency that was almost reverent. She stepped out of her heels without looking down. Every touch carried words. Every movement was a sentence in the conversation they had never finished. I missed you, you left me. I had to, I couldn't breathe, I know, I know, I know. She rose to meet all of it with equal force because she had been carrying the same weight and her body understood his completely, and the intensity built until it crested and took them both. Afterward, the room was very quiet. They lay still in the dim light, breathing. Then Jin sat up. He didn't speak. He gathered himself piece by piece and walked out without looking back, the door clicking softly shut behind him. Briana sat in the middle of the bed in the quiet room and stared at the wall and let it all marinate. What just happened? What does he want? What do I want? What happens now? The questions stacked without answers, and outside the window the Florida evening was going golden, and somewhere across town, a party was being prepared for a man who had just walked out of her room without a word. Except she knew one thing. Sitting in that quiet room, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She had never stopped loving him, not for a single day. The knock was soft, almost uncertain, nothing like the way he had burst through that door 20 minutes ago. This was different. This was a man who had walked away, made it halfway down the hall, and stopped. Briana opened the door. Jin stood in the hallway in his suit trousers and his open-collared shirt, jacket gone, hair slightly undone from her hands. He looked like himself and nothing like himself at the same time. All the composure, that careful architectural composure she had spent 3 years learning to read beneath, completely absent. He looked exhausted. He looked certain. He looked like a man who had been having an argument with himself in the hallway and had finally picked a side. He didn't wait for her to speak. I'm not doing it. His voice was quiet, absolute, the engagement. He held her gaze without flinching. I'm not going through with it. I should have told my father that 2 years ago. I should have said it clearly enough that leaving never occurred to you. I was doing you a favor, she said. You were the only thing I wanted. His jaw tightened. You left and I couldn't breathe for 6 months. I threw everything I had into work because it was the only thing that kept me from getting on a plane to New York, and I told myself you had made your choice, and I had to respect it. I believed that right up until I walked past this door and saw the light under it. She pressed her lips together. And then what? She said softly. You walk away from everything your father built, your family's name, everything he expects. Yes, no hesitation, without question, without looking back. He took one step closer. I have spent 2 years running a company I'm good at and living a life that looks exactly right from the outside and feels completely empty. You know what I think about every single day. She didn't answer, her throat had closed. The bookshelf, he said. She made a sound she hadn't intended. The badly built bookshelf in the Seoul apartment, and you on the counter laughing at me, and the coffee every morning, and the rooftop, and every ordinary thing that felt like everything because you were in it. The hallway was very quiet. Briana looked at him. At this man she had loved since a staircase in a mansion 3 years ago. This man she had left because she loved him and come back for and tried to let go of and failed at every step of the way. What about Ming Yi, she said. She deserves someone who can choose her fully. I can't do that. I can only choose you. I have only ever been able to choose you. The tears came before she could stop them. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth and looked at the ceiling and breathed. Jin crossed the last foot of distance between them. He took her face in both hands and tilted it down from the ceiling until she was looking at him. His thumbs moved over her cheekbones with a care that broke her the rest of the way open. I should have fought harder at that dinner table, he said quietly. I should have told you that night that you were not something I was willing to give up for any arrangement made before either of us was born. I'm saying it now, clearly, so there is no confusion. His forehead came to rest against hers. You really build terrible furniture, she whispered, a breath of a laugh, low and warm and achingly familiar. I know. Jin. Yes. She opened her eyes and looked at him, steady and certain, and completely done with careful distances. Don't you dare walk out of this room again. Something in his face went soft and absolute all at once. He kissed her, slow and sure and full of everything that should have been said 2 years ago, and she kissed him back fully, without reservation, without the weight of what anyone else needed from either of them. When they broke apart, the room was dim and the clock was still ticking and the engagement party was still out there waiting, and none of it felt as large as it had an hour ago. Jin pressed his lips to her forehead, held them there. I need to make a phone call, he said quietly. I know. He pressed one more kiss to her mouth, brief and certain, a promise, and stepped back and took out his phone and walked to the window. Briana sat on the edge of the bed and listened to him dial. Father. His voice was calm and final and utterly without apology. We need to talk, tonight, before the party. A pause, because I'm not going through with the engagement, that's why. Another pause longer. Jin's eyes found hers across the room and stayed there. Because there is someone else. There has only ever been someone else. Briana pressed her hand to her heart. Outside the window, the Florida sky had turned the deep burning pink of a day ending, and a new one already on its way. Mr. Han was already in the study when Jin arrived. He stood at the window with a glass of scotch he hadn't touched, looking out at the garden where party staff were still setting up tables and stringing lights between the palms. He didn't turn when Jin came in. He just said, "Close the door." Jin closed it. The study was dark wood and old books and the particular smell of a room that holds serious conversations, leather and paper, and something that reminded Jin of being 12 years old and terrified of disappointing this man. He wasn't 12 anymore. He crossed the room and stood beside his father at the window and waited. Mr. Han turned. He looked at his son for a long moment with the careful measuring expression Jin had been on the receiving end of his entire life. Then he looked back at the garden. How long, he said quietly. 3 years. A breath through the nose, Seoul. Before Seoul, since the day she arrived. Mr. Han was quiet for a long time. The scotch glass turned slowly in his hand. I see, Mr. Han said finally. Father, I am not finished. His voice was measured but not cold. The night your mother and I brought the families here for the announcement, I watched the two of you at that dinner table. A pause. You held your faces very well, both of you. I was almost convinced. Jin said nothing. I watched that girl sit at my table and take news that was going to destroy everything she had quietly built with you, and she did not make a sound. She did not flinch. She moved her food around her plate and she kept her face perfectly arranged, and she did not once look at you because she knew that if she looked at you she would not be able to keep herself together. Mr. Han's voice shifted. Something underneath it Jin had never heard before. I have been in love. I know what it looks like when someone is protecting the person they love at a cost to themselves. The room was very quiet. She called me, Jin said slowly, to arrange New York. Yes. You helped her. Yes, she asked me not to tell you. I honored that. A pause. I have wondered since whether that was the right decision. Jin pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. 2 years of gutted, furious silence given a shape and a reason all at once. The arrangement with the Yi family, he said carefully, was it truly non-negotiable? Mr. Han was quiet for a moment that lasted long enough to tell Jin everything. It was important, his father said. It was not non-negotiable. Jin turned to look at his father fully. Because you were 21 years old and I did not know, Mr. Han continued. I did not know it was already that serious. I did not know, he stopped, chose his words. I have run this company for 30 years. I have made thousands of decisions. I have been wrong before. A long pause. I believe I was wrong about this. The words landed in the room like something fragile being set down very carefully. In 31 years, Jin had heard this man admit to being wrong approximately twice. The Yi family, Jin said, will be disappointed. They will not be destroyed. Their daughter deserves a man who is choosing her, not a man who is thinking about someone else every day of his life. He set the scotch down. That would not serve anyone. Jin looked at his father. At the lines in his face, at the weight he carried in his shoulders. You liked her, Jin said quietly, not a question. Mr. Han's expression shifted. Something warm moved through it briefly. She sat at my table for 2 years and never once asked me for anything. She worked hard. She was kind to your stepmother without performing it. She made you, he stopped. You were different when she was here, lighter. He looked at his son. I noticed that too. Jin pressed his lips together against something threatening to crack his composure wide open. Father, I need to ask you something. I know what you're going to ask. Then, she is family, Mr. Han said simply. She has been family since her mother married me. That does not change. He picked up his scotch. The question of what it becomes is between you and her, and whatever you are both willing to build. A sound came out of Jin that was almost a laugh, unsteady, disbelieving, full of 3 years of weight lifting all at once. Mr. Han looked at his son and something passed across his face, something private and paternal that he did not put into words but that Jin felt land exactly where it was meant to. Go, his father said quietly. She is upstairs. I know. Jin, he turned back. His father looked at him with the expression of a man making the most he knows how to make of a mistake. I will speak to the Yi family tonight. You will not need to. Jin crossed the room, stopped with his hand on the door. Thank you, he said, meaning all of it. Mr. Han nodded once. Turned back to the window. Jin took the stairs 2 at a time. Briana was still on the edge of the bed where he had left her. She had redone her curls. Her hands were folded in her lap and her spine was straight in the way it got when she was holding herself together by sheer discipline and force of will. She looked up when he came in and something in her face asked the question before she could. He crossed the room and crouched in front of her and took both her hands in his. He knew, he said. She blinked. What? The dinner, 3 years ago. He knew something was between us. He said you held your face very well. The corner of his mouth moved, almost convincing. Briana stared at him. He never said anything. He said he honored your request. He also said he thinks he made the wrong call. Jin's thumbs moved over her knuckles. He said you are family, that doesn't change. Something moved through Brianna's face in sequence: surprise, disbelief, relief, and then something softer underneath all of it. Her eyes went bright. It's done, Jin said. The engagement, the arrangement, all of it. My father is calling the Yi family tonight. He looked up at her. There is nothing between us anymore. No arrangement, no secret, no careful distance. He squeezed her hands. Just you and me and whatever we decide to build from here. Brianna looked at him for a long moment. At this man crouching in front of her with all of his careful composure, completely surrendered, and his whole heart visible on his face. She slid off the edge of the bed and onto her knees in front of him so they were level. She took his face in her hands the way he always took hers. No more hiding, she said softly. Never again. She kissed him, slow and certain and full of something that wasn't longing anymore, something that had moved past longing into arrival, into the thing on the other side of all that waiting. He wrapped both arms around her and held her close and pressed his lips to the top of her head, and outside the window the party lights came on in the garden below, strung between the palms, turning the warm Florida night golden. 6 months later they stood together at the window of a new apartment. New York. The Brooklyn place she loved. Now there's her furniture mixed with his, the kitchen warm with the smell of something he was cooking, her curls loose around her shoulders the way he liked them best. The city spread out below them in the last light of a Saturday evening. Jin stood behind her with his arms around her waist, his chin resting on the top of her head. She could feel his heartbeat against her back, steady and unhurried. I built the bookshelf, he said. She laughed, soft and full and completely real. I saw it leans. It's structurally sound. Jin, it leans. She felt him smile against her hair. Below them, the city was lighting up the way it does every evening, block by block, window by window, a million small lives becoming visible in the dark. It had never looked so much like home. She turned in his arms to face him. He looked at her the way he had looked at her since the very first night on the staircase, with that quiet, complete attention, like she was something worth looking at properly. She reached up and straightened his collar. Hey, she said softly. Hey. We're okay, she said, not a question. He smiled, full and unhurried, the smile that still rearranged his whole face into something that made her chest ache in the best possible way. We're better than okay, he said. She kissed him. Outside, the city went on doing what cities do, indifferent and glittering and full of other stories, other people, other loves finding their way through all the noise. But in this apartment, in this kitchen, in this life they were building slowly and deliberately, and exactly the way they chose. Briana and Jin were finally, completely, irreversibly home. If you made it to the end, thank you. Seriously, you stayed through every moment of this story. I need to know, how did it make you feel? Drop a comment and tell me what you think. If this one stayed with you, hit the like button. It helps more people find stories like this. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and come back for the next one. Because it only gets deeper from here. Until next time.